everybody. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hi, Professor Dershowitz. It's so great to have you.
Nice to be on. Thank you.
So let's begin. Professor, as you know, every week we open our show with a special guest. Today, we're honored to have Chris Mitchell, the Middle East Bureau Chief of the Christian Broadcasting Network's News. He wants to talk about a major issue this week in worldwide news that sent Israel into a rage. UNESCO has just ratified a controversial resolution that denies Jewish ties to Jerusalem's holiest sites and even exclusively refers to those sites by their Islamic names.
Hello, Professor Dershowitz. This is Chris Mitchell, the Middle East Bureau Chief for CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network here in Jerusalem. I've admired your work for many years, especially your book, The Case for Israel, which is a must-read for those who want to understand the legal and historic connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. But once again, that connection is under assault. The latest example by the UN organization UNESCO, which voted that there was no Jewish connection for the Jewish people with the Temple Mount or the Western Wall. But that history goes back thousands of years. For example, King David bought the threshing floor back there on the Temple Mount behind me. His son, King Solomon, built the first Jewish temple, and another Jewish king, King Herod, expanded the Temple Mount as we see it today. There's also a significant Christian connection to the Temple Mount, because that's where in the New Testament it says that Jesus taught in that temple. And there's thousands of Christians right now in the city of Jerusalem celebrating that connection during the Feast of Tabernacles. On the face of it, the vote seems absurd. In fact, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said it's sort of like saying the Chinese have no connection to the Great Wall of China, or the Egyptians have no connections to the Egyptian pyramids. But as you know, Professor, votes matter and ideas matter. And this seems to be the latest assault on the connection, the historic connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. So my questions to you, Professor, are, what do you think will happen next? What can be done next? And how can Jews and Christians combat this latest assault on our shared history? Thanks.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. And thank you for your great reporting and the great work you do in bringing Jews and Christians together in defense of Israel. As you point out, this UNESCO lie is an assault not only on Jewish history, but on Christian theology and Christian history. And let's not put the blame solely on UNESCO. They are obviously at fault. But the blame goes squarely to the Palestinian Authority and to Hamas, both of which have made a point over and over again to try to persuade the world that there is no Jewish connection or Christian connection to the temple. President Bill Clinton once told me of a conversation he had with Yasser Arafat. And when Yasser Arafat denied the connection of Israel to the Temple Mount and to the temple and to Jerusalem, President Clinton, who was then the president, said to him, "You're denying my religious faith. You're denying me the New Testament story of Jesus and his connection to the temple and to Jerusalem, because, of course, Jesus was born a Jew." And so I think Jews and Christians have to fight together to defeat this lie. It's not just a lie. It is a politically motivated lie by the Palestinian Authority. It goes to the very, very top of the Palestinian Authority and to Hamas. And the only way to get this undone is to have the head of the Palestinian Authority, the leaders of the Palestinian Authority, go to UNESCO and say, no, we are wrong. There is a Jewish connection. The Jewish connection to Jerusalem, of course, and the Christian connection is far, far deeper than the Muslim connection. Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran. There is one story, obviously, about Muhammad ascending to heaven on his horse from there. But the Jewish connection, the Christian connection, go back centuries, and in the Jewish case, millennia before Islam was even established. So this is a joint fight, and it's truth versus lies. It's bigotry versus trying to live together. When you go to the old city of Jerusalem and you see in the best of times the Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, other quarters, the Muslim quarter. That should be a symbol of religions, all the Abrahamic religions living together. But the Palestinian Authority, let's put the blame where it belongs. The Palestinian Authority is behind the UNESCO resolution. We know that the UN will do anything for the Palestinian Authority. I think it was Abiy Ibn who said that if the Palestinian Authority issued a resolution saying the earth was flat and Israel flattened it, it would win with 76 votes in favor, 48 abstentions, and 11 negative votes. My criticism also goes to the abstainers. How dare you abstain from a resolution that is a lie? Are you again going to become complicit in this kind of bigotry, the way so many countries remain silent during other periods of history? Silence and abstention is not an option in the face of bigotry. So shape up, vote the right way, and vote for truth.
Thanks for your response, Professor. Now, let's take a listen to some questions from our viewers. Adam Ross works in Silicon Valley, California, the home of many of the world's most powerful social media platforms, from YouTube to Facebook. He wants your take on the power of these companies, given one of your recent personal experiences.
Hello, Professor Dershowitz. My name is Adam, and I'm in Silicon Valley, California. You recently published a video through Prager University that was restricted on YouTube for no apparent reason other than the fact that you were arguing the case for Israel. My question is, who should serve as the gatekeeper for free speech on social media? Are the rules transparent, and are they evenly applied against the parties on the various sides of this conflict? What should be the balance between free speech and the responsibilities of these gatekeepers to remove, edit, or censure language as it pertains to Israel?
You've asked the hardest question there is with the new media. Every new media creates new problems. Every new media is a double-edged sword. When the book replaced the scroll, that became an image that could be used for hate. I have in my home a proclamation published in 1490 in the city of Nuremberg, ironically, a blood libel. It was one of the first things that the printing press was used to circulate, blood libels against the Jewish people. So don't be surprised that the new media also is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. I think that many of the platforms now have a real problem about how not to censor free speech, but at the same time not to promote hatred. Some of them have just gone to algorithms, and recently I was the victim of that. An algorithm restricted a speech that I made, a 5-minute brief speech on the history of Israel, totally non-controversial. But it figured out somehow, the algorithm, that there may have been a word or two in there that somebody might deem offensive. I can't imagine what that word would be. And the algorithm put a restriction. I don't think it was done deliberately. I don't know whether the algorithms are biased in one way or another. And many of the internet programs refuse to obviously allow us to see what the algorithms are or allow human corrections. I think this is one of the great issues of the 21st century in the internet. How to balance free speech against hate speech, how to balance technology against the misuses of technology. I think, for example, the 2016 elections, the first election, dramatically influenced by the new technology. We're seeing hatred exaggerated, we're seeing bigotry exaggerated, we're seeing people who are bigots in the far-flung corners of the earth being able to get together and share their bigotry. So I think this is a great challenge, and for young people who want to have a tremendous career that can do an enormous amount of good in the world, it's to get into the area of the relationship between technology and free speech. It is a major frontier, and I hope it will be a frontier that, like the book and like the printing press, will be used mostly for good and only marginally for bad. And remember that the answer to falsehood is truth. The answer to bad speech is good speech. Censorship is never the answer.
Thanks for the response, Professor. Now, I hope you're ready for a question from the East Coast of the United States, where we both hail from. Jabria Howington works in Washington, D.C., and she wants to ask you about the Black Lives Matter movement, a group you often speak fervently about.
Good morning. My name is Jabria Howington from Washington, D.C. My question is regarding the Black Lives Matter movement. On many occasions, like Fox News, for example, you have described this movement as a threat to the criminal justice system. My question is twofold. First, do you believe it is irresponsible to label a whole movement as hypocritical based on a minority of its supporters who express anti-Semitic sentiments, or those who are advocating for a specific outcome based on race? Second, in your opinion, what do you think that supporters of this movement who genuinely want to promote fairness and equality can do to further this message?
Jabria, that's a great question and a fair point of criticism. Look, Black Lives Matter, and it's very important that we focus on the fact that our justice system disproportionately discriminates against people of color, and we have to stop that. And it's been a problem throughout my adult life. I was, of course, very much involved in issues relating to that during the Rodney King case and the O.J. Simpson case, but I went down south. I've been very active in the civil rights movement for decades and decades, and so I support strongly the basic core message of Black Lives Matter. But Black Lives Matter as an organization has been hijacked by hard left anti-Semites, haters of Israel, haters of Jews. And you have to judge an organization by its platform, not by a minority of people who may have hijacked it or a majority of people who don't believe in it, but the platform is what speaks for the organization. And so I will have no positive connection with the organization Black Lives Matter until and unless it rescinds its platform that singles out Israel and Israel alone as a genocidal and apartheid country. I'll give you an example. The police in Brazil, it was recently disclosed, are horribly racist and horribly discriminatory and horribly violent, and are much, much worse than the United States, certainly much worse than Israel. But Black Lives Matter hasn't said a word about Brazil, and it says, well, we're a domestic organization, we care about America. Then why is it focusing on Israel? There's only one possible explanation, and it's anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And if you had a Jewish organization that was very supportive of African Americans, but it was hijacked and taken over by racists or by anti-Muslim people or by anti-gay people, nobody would want to have anything to do with that. And so the job of us, the two of us and many others who support the program of Black Lives Matter, is to get rid of that platform and to marginalize the extremists and the anti-Semites among its leadership. You cannot seek the support of decent people if you have an indecent aspect in your program and in your platform. And so I will not in any way cooperate with the organization Black Lives Matter. I will try to start new organizations and support other organizations that support reform in our justice system, particularly focused on the inequality that African Americans suffer. But it has to be organizations that do not go out of their way to engage in blood libels and anti-Semitic attacks on the Jewish people and the nation state of the Jewish people. And it's a tragedy because we ought to be working together. The vast majority of American Jews support equality for blacks. We have been at the forefront of the movement for equality. Do not marginalize us. Do not get us out of your movement by attaching anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist elements to your platform. The responsibility now lies squarely with the leadership of Black Lives Matter. They must get rid of that platform libel, and we who support the concept of Black Lives Matter have to push very hard to make sure that they do that. But we cannot compromise with bigotry.
Professor, do you find a similarity between the way Black Lives Matter is being used by a minority within its leadership to advance an anti-Israel agenda to the way anti-Israel forces are, working within the United Nations?
Yes, and also on college campuses, this concept of intersectionality, which basically says that if you're in any way discriminated against, you must uh, make sure that people who support you also are opposed to Israel. And it becomes a litmus test at the United Nations on college campuses, and we cannot accept that. We have to remember that many of the worst movements in the world, communism, fascism, Nazism, all had some good elements that people wanted to support. But at the core of those movements were hatred and bigotry. And what I'm afraid of is that unless something is done to marginalize the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism within the Black Lives Matter, that it too will become a force for evil and a force for bigotry, a way of legitimating anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism within large elements that support African American equality.
Why do you think there isn't as much of an outcry regarding other human rights issues around the world? You know, what's happening in Syria, for example, like you mentioned, police brutality in Brazil. Why isn't this happening?
There's one simple answer, and that is hatred of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. There's no other explanation for that. You can't explain the BDS movement without looking to the fact that there are so many countries in the world that have extraordinarily bad human rights records, and they're not subject to any boycott or sanction or divestment. There is no such thing as the BDS movement. BDS is an attack only on the nation state of the Jewish people. And you cannot in any way defend a double standard applied against Israel, because that is a form of international anti-Semitism.
Thanks, Professor. Now, let's turn all the way to Asia for our next question. Yuval Ben David lives in Nepal, but he's originally from Israel. He wants to know your personal take on Zionism and its changing identity.
Hi, my name is Yuval. I currently live in Kathmandu, Nepal, and I graduated from Yale in May. And my question for you is whether over the years that you've been involved with Israel, visiting the country, working alongside political figures, doing activism, whether you've noticed a shift in what Zionism means to Zionists, whether the ideology, the justification, the rationale for this place, the vision behind this place, Israel, has changed, and whether it's changed for you as well.
It's a great question, Yuval, and I think the answer is, of course, it's changed. Any system, any ideology has to be dynamic. It has to change with the times. Israel started the way the United States started under Jefferson's vision of the United States as an agrarian society with kibbutzim, a very, very poor society, a weak militarily society. And now it's emerged through its own resources, namely high levels of ingenuity and intelligence as a superpower in the new technology. It's become a very, very different place than it was in 1948. But the core mission of Zionism has not changed at all. And there were always two core missions. One, to give the Jewish people a place where they can live normally as a majority, not a minority. The Jews were the only people in the world that didn't have a homeland in which they could be a majority, in which their literature, in which their music, in which their art could thrive under kind of natural circumstances, as Herzl put it. And the other great mission was to serve as a place of asylum for Jews who were discriminated against around the world. And the second has become even more important in recent years as we see increasing anti-Semitism throughout Eastern Europe, in Poland and Lithuania, in Hungary, in Slovakia, in Austria, in Greece. We're seeing it in the British Labour Party. We're seeing increased immigration to Israel. The Falashmora have to be welcomed more openly to Israel. Israel must be a place where any Jew who feels discriminated against anywhere in the world has an opportunity to go with no questions asked. You know, rights come from wrongs, and people have to learn from history. And the history of the Shoah is a history of every country in the world closing its doors. Canada saying even one is too many, not allowing Jews. The United States on the floor of the Senate saying, oh, sure, they're Jewish children now, but they'll grow up to be ugly Jews, adults later. So the door of every country was shut to them. So don't be surprised that the first law enacted when Zionism manifested itself in the Jewish state was a law that says that Israel will never turn away people who seek asylum from anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. And so the basic mission of Zionism has stayed the same, but of course, it's changed and will continue to change over time, as any ideology must adapt to changing circumstances.
That's all the time we have for today, unfortunately. Thanks for your time, Alan. We'd also like to thank all of our guests, especially Chris Mitchell, the Middle East Bureau Chief of the Christian Broadcasting Network's News. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week. Have a great weekend, Alan.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.